It's quite a special moment for me being here, actually. When I was 14 years old, my dad made me this promise. He said, Philip, because he didn't think I was going anywhere with my life. Because my dad's a medical man. He said, if you could ever end up talking here, I will buy you a Ford Cortina. So I am going to phone up my dad when I get out of here and say, Dad, I want a Cortina. It is 26 years, a bit late for it now, but I made it. So my dad's going to be happy. I just want to explain to him exactly what I'm doing here, because then he'll just be disappointed again. So we'll skip past that. This is what I'm here to talk about, the right camera for the right job. Jonathan was just talking about his choice. It was the right camera for him, what he chose. And Rick, I've had lots of conversations with Rick. In fact, I was doing an interview with Rick just 2 days ago. And we were talking 2 or 3 days ago, talking about different cameras and what he wants to buy next. He has specific uses for cameras and specific jobs, but he doesn't just do one thing. So there is a right camera for the right job for him. He was thinking, oh, shall I sell my EX1s? And then he realized really he shouldn't, because for him, that camera is the right camera for certain jobs, for filming things like this. So there is a right camera for different things. Doesn't mean you can't use a particular camera for everything. You pretty much can. But it's just deciding if you've got the resources, or if you own a camera, how you can use each one for the right job. So this is the big question, which I get asked all the time. Philip, which camera should I buy? I can't tell you which camera to buy. Which is the best camera to buy? There is no such thing as the best camera to buy. Every camera out there does different things. They're all at different price points. They're all for different jobs, but you can use them for the same job. So it really depends on how much money you've got, what you're shooting. That is the main thing. Now, here's a good example of 3 very different cameras. We have, of course, the lovely 5D Mark II, which until today, when the Canon 1DX was announced, it was the only camera that could shoot full HD video. Although the 1DX is not coming out till the end of March, so we still have a 5.5 month wait, full frame video is unique. No other camera is out there. So it's a great camera. It served me very well, and I still use it. I love the 5D Mark II. There's the AF 101, which you've already just heard about, which is a very nice camera. I'm going to talk about this in a bit. And then there's the Red Epic, which is the most expensive camera I've ever bought. I know it is there, and it's incredible. It's also not the right camera for a lot of the work that I do. So I'll explain a little bit further. The best thing I can do, and Jonathan again touched on this, is shooting for myself. Shooting for clients obviously pays you money, but it's nowhere near as much fun as shooting for yourself. Because clients, they nag you, they say change this, they say change that, and you try to argue the point with them, and you end up with something which doesn't necessarily please you, but as long as it pleases them and they pay you, that's the most important thing. So what I often do is I shoot for fun, whereas all I need to do is please myself, and that's the most important thing. And I love to shoot. Shooting for me is therapy. Shooting for me is relaxing. I'm never happier than with a camera. Now, I was over in America not that long ago, and I got back a few days ago. And just before I went to go on the plane, I shot a mini documentary with a friend of Sarah down there, she's known for many years. This guy here, Anthony, he runs this camera store, which is incredible, vintage camera store in Chicago. He also runs a photo booth business, vintage photo booth business. He's an amazing man with a huge story to tell. So I spent about 2.5 hours interviewing him and then getting lots of shots. Now I had an F3 with me. I could have used an Epic for this shoot. The camera I shot this on, I shot it on this. Why did I shoot it on this? Because first off, I hadn't shot anything with it yet. This is new, and I wanted to see what it was like. It's got a Super 35mm chip in this, believe it or not. This has the same size sensor as the F3. This has the same size sensor as an F35. This has the same size sensor as an F65. This has the same size sensor, not resolution, same size sensor as the Epic. So I want to say, well, and it's also cost me about $500 $400, so not a lot of money. I wanted to see what it was like. It's got lots of issues with it. Has moire, has aliasing, much like any DSLR has, but I wanted to see just how well it performs. So I'm just going to play you. I haven't cut this yet, I haven't had a chance to, but I've just cut together just 2 sound bites of what he said, and so I'll just play this for you now.
I've always had this struggle with being a collector. You know, I enjoy collecting things, but at some point, you know, what good is the collection if it just sits around? I mean, that's lame. You know, you want to have. It's nice to have other people get pleasure from it. Otherwise, you're just otherwise, you do become a hoarder. What's the difference between a hoarder and a collector? What's the difference between? Well, one person told me it's archiving. I don't know if I believe that. I think it's organization and not having cat feces. But if you have lots of stuff and lots of animals, then you have a problem. But a lot of cameras, that's okay. That's okay. When you have a disease that impacts your life, you start to think about things like, well, you know, it's strange. In a strange way, it hasn't made me, and you may not, I mean, it hasn't made me. It's made things, I guess, how do I explain it? Instead of like pulling back and say I should really concentrate on, you know, just one thing, I've actually expanded things. It's like, you know, it gives you the ability to say fuck it, basically. I'm gonna do whatever I want. It's actually liberating. Having cancer is actually liberating in some strange sense. So, you know, I'm not gonna die tomorrow. I think I'm gonna be around for quite some time. I know I'm gonna be around for quite some time because that's what I'm gonna do.
That was shot on that tiny little camera. It looks great, doesn't it? So I get some free time, I'm going to get that fully edited. But I was amazed at how well it performed for such a tiny little thing. And it was the right camera for the right job. He was also, because he's a camera geek, he was like astonished, like, you're going to film me on this? How? And then I showed him the monitor, what was coming out of it. It was like, you have to be kidding me. He was just completely blown away by it. So very, very happy with how the images turned out from that. And there's an NEX7, which is going to be a better version of that coming out in November from Sony. So I'm looking forward to trying that one out as well. And he wasn't talking about me, about people with too many animals and too many cameras and stuff at all. He was talking about himself, I'm sure. Now, one of the key things is which camera is right for you. It really depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting news, would you use DSLR? People like Dan Chung shoot with DSLRs. I shot news for 17 years. There's no way on earth I would ever want to shoot news in a DSLR. For news, I would want to shoot with an ENG camera on my shoulder, a nice big zoom lens. I don't want to have to worry about dual system sound or any image artifacts or anything like that. It really depends on what I'm shooting. Now, if I'm shooting a documentary, now, it really depends on what sort of documentary it is. Is there going to be lots of actuality, lots of handheld running around, or is it going to be very static? If I'm doing a commercial, then I'm most likely going to be using the Epic. It depends on what job you are shooting. That's, of course, if you have all of the resources. You're not always going to have the resources. And especially depending on budget. Budget is absolutely key. Just hearing what Jonathan's saying, how much he gets paid for a corporate gig, that's not a lot of money. Things have gone down in price a lot, because there's an oversaturation in the market. So your budget isn't going to, you know, if you wanted to shoot on the Epic and they're paying you £300 a day, you're not going to be able to shoot on the Epic because you're not going to be able to afford to hire it in. So, you know, again, it comes down to how much money you can get your hands on. It depends if you have a camera, and it depends on the job. And that's why it's almost better to hire the higher end cameras and just own like a cheap camera. And when I say cheap camera, I'm talking about the DSLRs or even the AF100. The AF100, how much is that to retail, Jonathan? £4,000 for a very powerful camera. I mean, I own an FS100 and the AF101. And the F100 or AF101 is actually a better camera. The FS100 has a better image, but to actually use day to day, which is very important, the AF is so much better. So if you use that sort of camera, then you really have to decide if you need to go up a budget, then get an F3 in. And if you get a lot of money, then go and get yourself an Epic or an Alexa or something like that. So, but you can shoot on anything, and that's the key thing. Here we go. We're very much in a state of flux with our cameras. We're now 3 years into the 5D Mark II. It's been a very intense 3 years, and I'm sure a fair few of you have shot on DSLRs in here. How many of you have shot on DSLRs? That's a huge amount of people. That is an astonishing amount of people. So it's obviously had a huge impact. Just the ability to shoot with 35mm optics and get that controlled depth of field for not a lot of cash is a very freeing thing. And I'm sure a lot of you have fallen in love with the image. Despite the shortcomings, it has an amazing image. Now, we have video cameras coming out which get rid of a lot of those issues. We're talking about the F3, the FS100, the AF101, and of course, whatever Canon bring out on November the 3rd. So but that's going to be more money. So it really depends what you want to invest in. And there's so many different formats out there. Like Jonathan's invested in the AF101, which takes micro four thirds lenses. He's done the smart thing. He's invested in Nikon lenses. So he's not backed himself into a corner. If he decides he wants to upgrade to a larger sensor camcorder at some stage, he'll be fine. But if he spends a fortune on micro four thirds lenses, which only work on micro four thirds, he'll have to sell those as well. So it's a very interesting time. And if people say to me, which camera should I buy today? It's even harder for me to answer because everything is, really much in a state of flux. If you have a camera now and it's working for you, stick with it. If you need a camera tomorrow, should you wait for, say, a Canon 5D Mark III? Are you earning money on this camera? Then in which case, go and buy a 5D Mark II tomorrow, because they're not that expensive, and you should be able to pay it off pretty fast, and you could always use it as a B camera. This is a documentary that I shot, gosh, it was just 2.5 years ago. It was the first feature documentary I shot that had the 5D Mark II in it. It had many shortcomings when I had this camera. 30p was the biggest one, and lack of manual control. A lot of you probably don't remember those horrible, painful days, but it was a pain. And so I did all the interviews on the EX3 with a 35mm adapter. This is a documentary about a fellow called Gene Sharp, and this documentary actually has done very, very well recently. It's been in 3 film festivals, and it's just won 3 times. It won Best Documentary in Boston, it won Best Documentary at Raindance, and it's just won the jury prize at Ottawa. So it's doing very well, which is great. And all the interviews were shot, I say, on the EX3 because the 5D Mark II at the time was not the right camera for that job because of dual system sound, because the sound recording on the 5D sucks, 12-minute record limit. All of these things just meant for me, no. 5D Mark II, beauty shots, EX3 35mm adapter, which will give me a nice 35mm look. Has anybody here had experience with 35mm adapters? They were great. I mean, they gave great images, but they ate up light and ergonomically were hell. Big, huge things, pain, but lovely images. So I mixed the two together. I'm just going to show you a little clip of it. It's not going to look the best because it's off a DVD, because I haven't got an HD copy yet of it. I'm just going to show you a very short clip of it. And so the interview is shot on the X3 and the beauty shots on the 5D. And this was before I knew anything of how to use the 5D properly, so I had all the wrong picture profiles, all the wrong settings, all of that rubbish.
Iran, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Serbia, Ukraine, Venezuela, Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and there'll probably be a couple more.
I think there's a father-daughter relationship developing there. They can sit down and talk, and they're on the same wavelength. She protects him, and I think she loves him as a daughter loves a father.
Gene Sharp is someone who is, of course, my personal mentor, but I think has served as that role for multitudes of people. He's someone who has dedicated his life to providing the means by which oppressed people can self-reliantly gain liberation. And that is something which I believe has changed the world and will continue to do so in dramatic ways. And I look forward to witnessing that and hopefully contributing to that.
He's an amazing guy. He wrote this book called How to Start a Revolution using Nonviolent Struggle. And it was actually, the template was used in this book to overthrow Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. So it's, this guy is incredibly relevant. And it's amazing that he's like 80 odd years old and nobody's ever made a film about him, which is astonishing because he's probably going to win the Nobel Peace Prize in the next year. So he's an amazing guy, and it's a fascinating documentary worth watching. This moved me on to another feature documentary. This is one I shot, when did I shoot this one? Last year? Now, I shot this entirely on DSLRs. Why? Because things have changed, and things are always changing. Dual system sound was the thing that always killed me. And the worst thing you can do as a documentary filmmaker when interviewing somebody is interrupt them. You need to have a conversation with them, and you need to make them forget that they are being filmed. And that's the key thing. One of the lovely things about DSLRs is their light sensitivity. And you can light in a lovely, beautiful, naturalistic way without blasting them with light. And in this interview, which is a very intense documentary, these are people who've lost their children through violence, through murder, and have never spoken before on camera. But what changed is the reason why I moved onto DSLRs and left the 35mm adapter behind in the EX was simply a piece of software called Pluralize, which I'm sure some of you have used, which is amazing, the most amazing thing. And I used it for the thing with Anthony, the camera guy. All you need to do is record sound on your camera. Doesn't matter how average, the sound out of the NEX5N on that built-in microphone makes the sound out of the 5D Mark II sound like it's recorded on the most high-end microphone ever. It's that bad. It's awful. It's so awful, I can't even stress how awful it is. But it was good enough for Pluralize to sync up with what I recorded on my Tascam external recorder. And so we shot everything dual system sound and had a very simple system, because what I didn't want to do was do sync points and interrupt things, and the director's questions were not used. So all I did was, because you've got this 12-minute limit as well, I was listening to the interview and watching the counter count up on the camera. And when it got to around 7 minutes, 8 minutes, I was waiting for that answer to finish. And as soon as the director would start asking that next question, which may be at 8 minutes, maybe at 9 minutes, maybe at 10 minutes, I go off, on. Start a new clip, leave the Tascam recording, do not touch it, and it all works fine. You just have loads of little video clips, one long audio clip, and it syncs beautifully together. It was great, and it worked really well. I did actually use the 7D for the interviews, not the 5D, again, because it's the right camera for the right job. Why? Because the 5D Mark II, when it overheats, it doesn't tell you, and when it overheats, it gives you noise in the image. So it's something a lot of people aren't aware of. The 7D, it does overheat. You probably think my 7D overheats more than my 5D. It doesn't. 5D overheats just as much. The 7D just gives you a warning that it's overheating, and then it will switch off before the image degrades. The 5D does not do that. So when recording long-form stuff like interviews, the 5D for me, big no-no. Ways around it, put a battery pack underneath will help it. But these were the two cameras I used, and I'm going to show you a little trailer for that now.
"15, 20 years, there's not a time that goes by when I don't think about these cases.
It was the first time that I ever would have said my kids couldn't throw their sleeping bags out in the backyard and spend the night.
Everybody was really scared because of the circumstances.
That's an awful long time to not know or have anything concrete done.
Nobody knew who the killer was or if somebody was going to be next.
He was right there. He was right in my face. I will remember that forever.
The sheriff boats were out on the river for a couple of days collecting remains.
When you take someone's child and they disappear and you have no idea, and you always imagine the worst happening,
it doesn't just stay with the immediate family. These events that happen, it spreads out.
If they hired me to do that job today, would I still shoot on those cameras? No. Because there's the F3 and the FS100 and the AF100 out there, which just makes life that little bit easier. The syncing sound is actually really quite simple. It doesn't take too long. There's always a possibility though that it may not work, and it's always much easier if you don't have to sync sound than to have to sync sound. So a documentary which is almost entirely talking head based, which around 75–80% of this documentary is, it would make more sense today to shoot that on any of these large format camcorders. Not saying the image out of these cameras were fantastic and it looks amazing. I was very happy with the performance, but it's not the right tool for the right job for me today. I'm not saying I wouldn't shoot it. If I didn't have access to the other cameras, I could still shoot on those. But if you have access to other cameras, it's not the right tool for the right job for this. But I still want to keep the camera small because I don't like having big rigs and lots of lights. A really good example of one of the worst lightings I've seen and setups for somebody who's never been filmed before was when I shot as an episode of Tonight with Trevor McDonald. And I was just one of the operators of 3. And the lighting cameraman, he stuck up 8 lights, which is a lot of lights, 8 hot lights. None of them are cool lights, all hot lights. This woman had never talked on TV before, and we had 3 cameras in there. And she was like a rabbit in the headlights. It was terrible. It was just a really bad interview because she just felt incredibly uncomfortable. So so I'd still want to keep things nice and small, and people really react better to smaller cameras. Being filmed on a DSLR as opposed to an F3 with a matte box on it, they will respond better to it. They feel more relaxed about it. It's just a psychological thing about having a smaller camera. So again, you've got to find the right balance.
Video.